Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to start the webinar. This webinar is entitled Translating RDA, a discussion of the opportunities, challenges of an international cataloging standard. My name is James Hennelly. I'm the director of ALA Digital Reference. I work for ALA Publishing and Media, and I oversee day-to-day management of the RDA Toolkit. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction today into translating RDA, and then we're going to take a deeper dive into the ups and downs and ins and outs of the translation process with three of our lead translators. First up will be Rania Osman of Bibliotheca Alexandrina in Egypt, who will talk about the particularly challenging aspect of translating RDA into Arabic. She leads that translation team, and that's the first one that we'll be using a non-Roman script in the toolkit. So that's an interesting challenge for us. Then she'll be followed by Danielle Paradis of the National Library and Archives of Quebec. Danielle leads the French translation team and has been chair of the translation RDA translation working group for as long as I can remember. And then finally, Marja-Liisa Seppälä of the National Library of Finland will talk about the efforts of her Finnish team in their translation. The Finnish team has been really at the forefront of translating RDA, particularly after this, after the 3R project. They've been kind of the first ones to try everything and are really testing out and helping us shape the process going forward. So I think they'll all have some really interesting things to share. So by way of introduction, I just want to inform you, there's an RDA translation policy. It's available on our website at rdatoolkit.org. Ramon, maybe you can pop that link into the chat for the translation policy. You can find it right there on our homepage of rdatoolkit.org. And if you link in, click on translations, you'll see the translation policy. Basically, there are two types of translations. There's a partial, or what we sometimes refer to as reference translations, and there are full translations. The policy contains some information about print translations. I should warn you right off the start that with the revisions and changes to RDA that came out of the 3R project, a print version of the full RDA standard is not really a viable product, at least in my business experience in publishing. It would be just much too long and extremely expensive to put together. And I don't know that it would navigate quite well. The new revised RDA is really meant for the digital environment. That said, we can, there are other print products that are possible. We published the glossary, the complete collection of the entities, elements, vocabularies, and key terms that are associated with RDA are available in print, and we'll also be, hopefully in the next year or so, coming out with RDA Essentials, an update to RDA Essentials that reflects the changes that occurred with the 3R project. And we'll start exploring maybe some other formats for folks who maybe don't have the best or most reliable internet service and who are looking for more of a one-off kind of purchase rather than a subscription. So maybe there's a CD-ROM type version or something like that we can consider going forward. The other big thing that the translation policy covers is permissions. For both types of translation, partial or full, or even print, we do require permission. So you need to contact us if you're interested in translating at rdatoolkit@ala.org. Depending on what type of translation you want to do will affect what kind of permissions, the degree of, or the type of permissions that are required to do that work. And any permission agreement that we do come up with typically involves access to our RDA development tools. We have several different tools that we use. And just to make sure everyone's getting the latest and the proper versions of RDA to translate, we ask that you use our tools that we supply. Before we go any further, I'm going to go into a little more depth on what a partial or a reference translation is. There's, first of all, you should know there's no fee associated, licensing fee or anything like that associated with a partial or reference translation. The only requirements we have are, one, you do need to have a command of English language so that you can understand what we're trying to say with the terms and definitions that we use. The partial reference is really the RDA glossary. It's the entities, elements, vocabularies, and other terms that are critical to the RDA standard. It includes their definitions and scope notes. So you do need to have some kind of command and comfort with the English language so that you can translate, obviously, from English into your language. And also, it's really important that you have already have a working familiarity with RDA and LRM, which is Library Reference Model from IFLA, which is the conceptual model that RDA is based upon. The tools we provide for reference translations are what we call the staff registry, which is our background database that would hold all the translation once you complete it of that reference material. The reference material would also be published on the registry, the RDA registry, which is at rdaregistry.info. And then we also provide these CSVs spreadsheets that contain all the translatable material that you need to work on. So what we do is, if you're doing a reference translation, we provide you with the forms for you to work in, and then you return those to us and we process them and post them to our staff registry and also to the official RDA registry. So a full or toolkit translation, that is, you're translating the entire instruction, all the instructions for RDA, and it will be published on the RDA toolkit. It does require a one-time fee and a negotiated agreement. So the agreement for the toolkit translation or full translation is a little more in depth and complicated and requires a little bit more back and forth. And it may include a distribution component. So if you're interested in being a distribution partner in your area, we can work out agreement for that. We have distribution partners in Southeast Asia and Latin America right now, and certainly in different parts of the world where English isn't widely spoken. From a customer service standpoint, it's advantageous to us if we can identify a distribution partner who's comfortable in managing customer service for folks who aren't necessarily comfortable in English. The full toolkit translation includes all of the reference translation I just mentioned. It also includes translation of the entity element pages, the guidance pages, examples, and the user interface. It also provides the option to translate the help files that are available in the toolkit, and the community resources area of the toolkit. So all those things are kind of come with the full toolkit translation. To complete this translation, again, you get access to the CVS translation templates for the registry information, the reference information. You also get access to Trados Studio and Group Share. We'll try to provide training and support for that. It's a really powerful translation software that we, the licenses are hosted online, and so you can access it from wherever you are and work in that environment to do most of your translation. And most of the translation work will occur in that kind of, in the Trados software. And then finally, we also have our own content management system that we use for Toolkit. So you will have access to that, which will help you maintain your files, and especially if you're interested in doing, so like adding your own examples, which you can do beyond what we normally, what the English language original toolkit content provides. You can add examples that are specific to your language community, etc. And you would probably do that within the content management system. So this is just a quick introduction to some of the pieces that are involved in the translation work and kind of what your choices are. This is where I kind of prefer to hand it over to our translators to talk about their very real experiences with translation, which I think will be most helpful to you. So next, we're going to hand it over to Rania Osman of Biblioteca Alexandrina.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's very nice actually to be part of this webinar, because it's always a pleasure for me to talk about RDA and RDA translations. Since this project is one of the most useful and powerful projects that we as Biblioteca Alexandrina were aspiring to have and to work on this project. As we worked already on many projects, on many standard projects on bibliographic tools like translating Mark 21 into Arabic and the DOE 23rd edition. So for us to translate RDA was actually the most recent standard, and also to provide the Arab region with the Arabic translation was a must. So to decide to translate RDA, actually it went into many decisions and debates, because we were thinking all the time, if we translate RDA into Arabic, do we have many libraries that would adopt RDA from the start? So our work was not only to translate, but also to provide promotional materials and provide trainings in Biblioteca Alexandrina and also in many conferences that we participated in, and to talk more about RDA and the benefits of adapting RDA in the Arab regions. For some libraries were already, most of the libraries, not most, all of the libraries in the Arab region using Mark 21 and of course AACR2. And we have a translation for the AACR2 in Arabic for the edition of 2006. And so we were so familiar with this tool already, it's in Arabic. So to talk about a new standard and adapting a new standard, actually it was a challenge. The most interesting thing that people were really interesting to know, but the most obstacles that they faced was the language of the RDA. And this, from this point, we started to talk about, and if we provided Arabic translation, would it be easier for you to adapt to RDA? So from this point, we thought about translating RDA to meet the need of the Arab region. And also we thought that they are ready, and I'll show this in my presentation, how they were ready. Also to introduce the Arab community and cataloging community especially to an international standard from the start, because every time we wait for the standard to take all the steps and all the developments, and then we participate. But for RDA, we participated from the start since its first launching. So to have it in Arabic also is a plus for many librarians and catalogers to know more about the standards. And this happened a lot also. Also for the practices of the Arab library, providing Arabic unfilled controlled vocabularies. Since we used to work with controlled vocabularies in our previous standards translations, we wanted the translation of the RDA to map with the controlled vocabularies used in the Arab region, not to bring new vocabularies. So we have before the double ACR2, but we have a new vocabularies introduced. So we want to have new vocabulary introduced, which is mapping with the needs of the Arab libraries. That's why we have introduced the tools, and we participated with the AFLI, the Arab Federation for Library Association, and we cooperated to have many librarians from different regions participated with us as translators. So we have different views, either from Lebanon and from Jordan, and we have people from Emirates, so, and Egypt, of course. So we wanted to be not only Egypt vocabulary, but to have different synonyms and to consult each other to choose. So I mentioned that we found that people were ready already for the RDA. Yes, they were very ready. And we have some surveys, and we asked it in many conferences about how they are ready. So you can find in my presentation a lot about a lot about the libraries in Egypt, but we have more. And also some information about libraries in the Arab region, but also we have more. This is not only what we have. So we found that 2 libraries already subscribed to AutoCAT listserv. When we were searching, we find only 2 libraries, and 5 libraries have remote access to bibliographic utilities like OCLC. 10 libraries have Pentium-based workstations. When I talk about this for the Arab region, we don't have much libraries that they have the full toolkit. They don't have the not the full catalogers tools. Like WebDiwi or OCLC, not many are subscribed to OCLC, not many are subscribed to WebDiwi. And many libraries, due to costs and budget and the shortage of the employees, they just have the printed versions of the tools, like the Diwi and the even the use, of course, markets. It's free and it's found. They use the printed version of the DOE. They use even the printed version of RDA. When they know about the RDA, they were having the printed version already. So to subscribe and to know more about the tool, this also was one of the challenges that we faced. So you are mentioning RDA, and when you mention RDA to many of them, they said like it's an institutional decision that we have to take. We are now talking about the WebDiwi. We have budget only for the OCLC, for our subscriptions, for the cataloger desktop. So this also was a challenge, but we worked hard on this. And in Egypt, actually, catalogers desktop and WebDiwi and RDA toolkit were only provided in Biblioteca Alexandrina and the American University in Cairo. So you can find only 2 big places who worked on RDA and who subscribed firstly on RDA toolkit. But this also changed. We found that using WebDiwi in around 16 Arab countries, and of course we know that by 2001 OCLC introduced its Arabic cataloging services to the world, and many members in the Arab region started applying it. Also, when we decide to take the step, we were thinking about the bibliographic standards used in the Arab region. Most of the, as I mentioned, all of the Arab region were very familiar with the 2006 full Arabic translation of the second edition of the Anglo-American Cataloging Rules. And it was released in Egypt, and it was actually translated by our professors in Cairo University. And by the way, Dr. Fathi Abdelhadi is the one who was leading the translation of the AACR2 in Arabic into Arabic, is one of our team actually, and he is leading also the translation with us, and he's doing much effort with us. So this is to make full use of the experience they had when they translated the AACR2, of course, with all the difference. And also the translation of the Ferber, there were many translations of Ferber that was launched by IFLA, and many Arab librarians were very interested to know more about Ferber and Frad, of course, and all the Ferber family when it was first published. And then when we moved to LRM, now we find that many people are talking about the change in the vocabulary and how they found it really difficult for them. And if we have a translation of RDA with all the new vocabulary introduced in RDA, this would map and this would make them understand more about LRM. Also, there was developing of national regional union catalogs, either Egyptian Schools Union Catalog and Egyptian University Library Automation, Jordanian Union Catalogs. So we found that many experiences and many efforts are made actually in the Arab region that made the decision easier for us. For us and Bibliotheca Alexandrina, actually we were very interested also to know if the technologies and how the libraries would adapt if they are ready already. So we found that Qatar National Library already has signed with Zefira to publish its Arabic content. And this means that many libraries already is joining the recent, and they were actually of the first to adapt RDA and developing international, library systems knowledge solution in the Arab region. This also was one of the challenges that we faced, because many libraries and many librarians were talking about that the library systems they use is not compatible with the RDA, and they can't apply all the linking and all this. So they said, like, no, we can't apply we can't adapt to the RDA now because we need to change to another library system. And we found many library systems either regionally developed or even developed locally, like the ones that we have by Akmal. This is in Alexandria, and Technology, and also Future System. So this means that even the solutions to solve all the problems that the librarians mentioned was there. So this also was one of the reasons that made us think about translation. Okay. I mentioned before the Arab interest in RDA. Actually, many conferences were there, and sorry, I need to navigate back. So many conferences were there in the Arab region, and also many Arabs wanted to attend all the international either conferences, either held by ALA, any webinars that was held by ALA. I had participated in many conferences, and I delivered many workshops either in ALA Sharjah or Malaysia or even with IFLA. And I found that many librarians and catalogers were there and registered, and they were asking all the time, is there gonna be any webinar? Is there gonna be any workshop talking about RDA trainings? We wanted to attend, and we found many trainings either, and of course we mentioned many places that were very active, the United Arab Emirates, and of course Iraq. They were very active actually, and in Egypt and Lebanon, of course. So why did we choose full RDA toolkit translation? Actually, this was an institutional decision. And for us, since I mentioned all the reasons that made us take the decision to translate RDA from the start, from all the surveys and from all the market research that we did, we found that many people facing already problems with applying the examples. So AACR was there with all the examples, and still we received questions when we were doing cataloging. And so if we apply the RDA toolkit, just the basics, the glossary, without applying some examples or even translating the examples, and this is the most important thing for the catalogers, because they want to follow the pattern, they want to follow the pattern, sorry, that you provided. So just they follow the rule and they read about it. And so even the rules itself, in the interpretation of the rules, we found many questions on the RDA listserv, many questions that we received from Lebanon and from different countries in the Arab region here for us in Bibliotheca Alexandrina about the practices and how we apply the rule. So this was taken into consideration when we decided to translate, to take the full RDA toolkit translation, also to be part of the tool from the start, to have all the discussions and all the suggestions brought to our table, and to provide it to the RDA steering committee, or to provide it to the translation team, so we can even suggest some solutions to some terms, to even suggest some vocabularies that seems not clear, and to also to provide Arabic examples, because we have some materials that needs actually to be shown and declared and cleared with examples. So this was part of our decision to take the full RDA toolkit translation, and also to collect and deliver all the users' feedback on RDA toolkit to help to make enhancement on the RDA toolkit itself. Actually, we don't receive much feedback because most of the libraries in the Arab region still doing the first or second phase of adapting RDA. Not many have done much progress, except the most active actually persons are in Iraq and Lebanon. They send us many questions and many feedbacks. So but we can see that they developed and they are following all the 3R project, and they are following even when we had the beta trials, most of them joined this and they send us many feedbacks. This was part of our decision to take. And also to optimize to the Arab cataloging requirement, because when I mentioned that AACR was there and we found it translated already, I didn't actually attend when it was first published, but when it was translated, and then I was a cataloger, and I was introduced to the AACR in the first step for me to be a cataloger. I found that many details and many things that I could not understand, I could not comprehend, I could not even, there were things like, it's like this. You don't have this clarification, but with RDA, and since we were following RDA, for me, I was following RDA since 2008, it was a dream for me. So I found it how it's flourishing and how you can find its mapping and with other tools. So for us in the Arab region, and for our requirement for cataloging, with all our materials and all the unique things that we need, either for the manuscripts, Arab manuscripts, or for the Islamic books, or for the Bible, or for the books that needs to some special treatment, we need to put our fingers from the start. We need to be there from the start. We need to establish links and cross-references, internal and external, to other related standards and relevant materials where appropriate. Actually, we translated already MARC and we did translated the DOE. So it's easier for us to link between the mark, the Arabic version, and the RDA. So it would be easier for the users to go from this to this and to find it all in Arabic. Also to make necessary amendments and expansions needed to suit the Arab cataloging needs, and for localization requirements also, Arabic list of, for example, Arabic list of abbreviations to identify elements that are core for the cataloging of Arabic materials and the Arab intellectual production, and to provide Arabic examples in addition to the English existing ones inside elements example, and to develop and add Arabic examples of full RDA records for both bibliographic and authority records in mark encoding. Actually, there is also another thing, is to provide sample of policies, because we have this agreement with our national library here in Egypt, that we could provide our policy after their agreement with them. So it would benefit all to have a sample of a policy used for all the Arabic catalogers in the Arab region. Also, to cover all the types of content and media while supporting users' task ensures that the Arab libraries remain viable, actually, and allowing Arabic-speaking users to interact with the collection of cataloging resources and the documents. This is what I mentioned, is to make them active and to join the community with full understanding of the tool, so they couldn't face this challenge of the language barrier. And also, the most important thing for us is a wider adoption of the cataloging standard by the Arab library communities. This is our target from the start. The more libraries adopting RDA, the more feedback that we receive, the more users of our translated standards. Also, to allow the academic Arab library community to contribute and to have this engagement with the international cataloging community. So the challenges for us, and I'm just gonna wrap up all the challenges that we face, and this is from our point of view as translators for the Arabic. The RDA actually is hardly used in libraries across the Arab world, and there are no established standardized practice. So when we mention RDA, we still, as I mentioned, still in the first steps, even after all these years, still in the first steps. So it's very hard to maintain the consistency of terms across the different RDA. The different RDA files that we have, it was very different. It was, sorry, very difficult for us to maintain consistency, because we need to use the same term in Arabic with different English terms. So we don't have much equivalence. We had technical problems actually, and this happened when we used Google Sheets. This is when we used the RDA registry, and when we uploaded our files. Problems with savings and on searching, but this actually were solved. But we faced this in the start. This is one of the challenges specific to the Arabic language: translation into Arabic of the terms. For example, nomen and designation and appellation. Actually, we have the same Arabic word for the same 3 English terms. And when we had another word in Arabic, another synonyms, it's like, it's not very familiar with the Arab region. So this is another problem that we face in Arabic, that we need to introduce an Arabic term that's familiar with the catalogers community. Because when you brought up a new term, it got confused and they don't know what is the specification and the identification of this word. And also the connotation of some words and how they, the connotation itself and how they translate this word in their minds, so they can use it appropriately. This was one of the problems. So it's nomen, designation, and appellation, and it's tasmiya in Arabic. Also, the translation into Arabic of the terms curator and custodian. It's wasi in Arabic, also the same, but we have other Arabic terms and Arabic equivalents, but it's not that strong in its effect and in its meanings like the first one. So the first suggested Arabic equivalent underlined in the above table are one, and the same for the terms curator and custodian. So we need to use more terms. This was like not many terms. We faced this with the English vocabulary, but it happened with valuable terms like custodian and curator, and it's used a lot, and nomen, of course. Okay. Oh, so that's it. And I didn't go into details with all the challenges that we face with the Arabic translation, and of course with the Arabic language community. We faced much more, even with the team itself, because the team is from different countries. So when we meet either online or even face-to-face, and we suggest a word that's equivalent to an English term, we have some voting and we have some resistance. And it took us a lot of time actually for some words to choose or to select the appropriate one by the end. And we have this word, and we have the opinions of the catalogers, either in Biblioteca Alexandrina or outside. So we send them and we have their feedback, and then we select the word. So we didn't want to bring new words that doesn't have this connotation of the meaning, of the right meaning to our users. This was the most challenging problems that we faced. But of course, we faced a lot with plural and singular, and we with the definite and indefinite words that should we put. Because in Arabic, you most of us using alif lam, which is to make it different words. So we have this specification of the Arabic language, but we already managed to be consistent, either to use it or not use it with all the words. And that's it. We're trying actually. We finished the RDA glossary and reference, the first part was and element set. And we hope with the second part, with the translation, to be actually more challenging, and we face more problems actually. And because when we face more problems, it means that we are on the right track. So thank you.
Thank you, Rania. Just before we move on, I just want to say if we will take questions at the end. So if anyone wants to type in questions as they pop in your head into the chat area, that would be great. We'll collect them there. So just write any questions you have into the chat. At this point, I'll turn it over to Daniel Paradis.
Well, hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My part of the presentation will be a little more technical than Rania's presentation, but I hope it will give you also a context of that will explain some of the challenges that Rania talked about, because we faced some of the same challenges. So it's going to be more like an under the hood explanation of the one part of the translation. So I will give an overview of the process of translating RDA reference, and I will also address some of the issues that we encountered when we worked on the French translation of RDA reference. So what is RDA reference? Well, Jamie already gave an explanation of that, but I thought it would be useful to explain what it is by quoting the description that is given in the RDA registry. So the registry says that RDA reference includes all RDA elements, their definitions, and any related scope notes, and all value vocabulary terms and definitions. RDA elements include entities, attributes, and relationships described in RDF. And the value vocabularies include the control terminologies for RDA data given in the toolkit instructions, and also a controlled terminology used with the instructions in general. And this is the vocabulary we call RDA terms. So in other words, RDA reference corresponds to the content of the glossary in the toolkit. So Jamie already talked about partial versus full translations of RDA because as he explained, communities interested in translating RDA have basically two options. They can choose to do a full translation of RDA, which means translating the RDA instructions in the RDA toolkit, or to do a partial translation, that is, translate only RDA reference. For those choosing to do a full translation, however, translating RDA reference is mandatory because it's required as the initial step to translate the RDA toolkit, because the process of translating the toolkit assumes that the translation of RDA reference will be available in the staff registry to populate toolkit pages where appropriate. However, if the resources available in a given community to translate RDA are not sufficient, or if the level of English proficiency in a community is deemed sufficient, well, that community might decide to only do a partial translation. So this way, catalogers would be able to use RDA reference in their own language, but they would use the English version of the RDA toolkit to apply RDA instructions. Doing a partial translation then ensures that RDA reference is published as linked data in the language of that community in the RDA registry. So as you can see, the slide shows two screenshots from the RDA registry, one with the list of elements and element sets and vocabularies, and the other shows one element set and all the translations available for that set. So, sorry, here I'm a bit, yeah, okay. So the RDA registry also explains, and I quote, that less than full translation of RDA that cover all or part of RDA reference are also possible if the translation is maintained by an RDA user community or individual authorized by ALA digital reference. So in other words, translating all of RDA reference is not mandatory. Community can decide to just select some of the element sets, for example, or some of the vocabularies. So how does it work in practice? Well, the translations of RDA reference are uploaded into the staff registry that Jamie talked about using CSV files that are called translation templates. So normally all scripts are supported in these files as long as the spreadsheet that is used can open and save files as UTF encoded files. So there used to be, I think as Rania alluded to, one template per element set and value vocabulary. So that made it a little more complicated and maybe more difficult, but the current template combines them all in one file. The template contains one row for each property that is related to an element or a vocabulary value. And there are always a minimum of 4 properties and therefore 4 rows for each element or vocabulary value. So the template includes right now more than 18,300 rows, which seems a bit daunting, but this number includes deprecated elements and vocabulary values, which actually do not need to be translated. The template also includes properties for unconstrained elements, and also for RDA Onyx framework value vocabularies, and the translation of these elements and vocabularies is optional. So the properties that need to be translated are those that represent the 3,013 elements currently in RDA reference and the 637 vocabulary values. So these figures do not include the deprecated values. And again, it should be noted that the community has the option of translating only a subset of these sets. So as I said earlier, there are always 4 properties for each element of vocabulary value in the template. That is 2 types of labels and 2 types of definitions. One set of labels and definitions is for the registry and the other for the toolkit. So the registry label and definitions are SCOS and RDFS properties, while the toolkit labels and definitions are properties that belong to a schema that was designed for the RDA toolkit and is identified by the prefix RDA kit in the examples that I gave, in the properties that I gave on the slide. So assuming that a community decides to tackle all the RDA element sets and vocabularies, this means a minimum of 14,600 rows for which a translation must be provided. But one has to keep in mind that even though 14,600 rows, might look like a lot, we have to remember that some of the content is duplicated or reused, which reduces the amount of original translation to be done. For instance, for value vocabularies, the two types of labels and the two types of definitions are identical. So, once you translated one label and one definition, translating the other is just a matter of copying and pasting. For elements, the label and definition appearing in the RDA registry are different, but they are verbalized versions of the RDA toolkit label and definition. Specifically, the label is a verbal phrase using the pattern is or has, followed by the toolkit label. The definition includes, on the other hand, the type of entity to which the element applies, the domain, and uses the template pattern, relates a domain entity to, followed by the toolkit definition. So the slide shows the element singer agent as an example of how the label and the definition appear in the RDA registry. So one can see that the terms that were added to the toolkit label and definition are highlighted in yellow. In this slide, one can see that the registry label for elements is given as an alternate label in the element reference section of element pages in the toolkit. And in addition to these basic properties, some elements and vocabulary values have one or two additional elements. In the translation template, at least one is for a scope note and the other for alternate labels, that is synonyms of the preferred label. These include, incidentally, labels from the original toolkit when they have been modified during the 3R project. Synonyms only need to be translated when there is an actual equivalent in the target language. So sometimes the synonym exists only in English and therefore it can be ignored in the translation. On the other hand, sometimes the target language has more synonyms than there is in English, and therefore those synonyms can be added also. So just to give you a more concrete example here, you have in the slide, I'm showing how the properties for a vocabulary value are displayed in the translation template. The template includes many more columns that are not shown here. You can see that the labels and definitions duplicate each other. For this value, multiple unit, the term multi-part monograph was added as a synonym. This other slide shows how the properties for an element are displayed in the translation template. You can see how the registry label and definition are derived from the toolkit label and definition. For this element, a scope note is included. And once again, not all columns in the template are included. So adding a translation is relatively easy. The template includes a column specifically for new or revised translations. Only the new translation column should be altered, and translators are told that the content in all the other columns must not be altered in any way. So as I said, adding a translation is easy, but translators must keep in mind that a spreadsheet, of course, doesn't have all the functionalities of a word processor, such as spell checking or automatic corrections. So they might consider working in a word processor before copying and pasting their translation into the toolkit if they want to take advantage of these functionalities. So producing a translation that is both accurate and idiomatic presents its challenges, of course. In the case of RDA reference, there is a rule that each label be unique, and that presents an additional difficulty that Rania talked about, because the target language does not always have enough synonyms or enough terms to meet that requirement. And here I give an example in French, where series and collection are both translated idiomatically by collection. So how do we differentiate the labels when no exact synonyms are available? One has to keep in mind also that some of these terms might appear also in element labels. So we have to be mindful of that when we choose a translation. So we temporarily differentiated the concept by using collection de ressources for collection, but the new collections model that will be examined soon by the RSC introduces many new terms that might force us to find another solution. And we recognize it's less than ideal, but during the process, we've been reminded regularly that it's not, and I think catalogers now also should know that about RDA, that the label cannot be used by itself to understand the scope of an element. You really have to rely on the definition. So another challenge was that some vocabularies use specialized technical terminology, for example, for material and production method. So in these cases, these vocabularies might require terminological research. At least in French, some terms simply don't exist. For example, some terms for Braille music. So French equivalents had to be devised. So in that case, this required finding and studying manuals for Braille music in order to understand what the layouts meant. As part of the 3R project, well, many new neologisms were introduced. For example, aggregating work, amalgamation, cardinality restriction, entity boundary. These are concepts and terms that might be used also in other the web semantic community, but they're not necessarily very well known in French. So that was an added difficulty. And French uses grammatical gender. So in some cases, gender agreement in French was not obvious. For example, should we choose personne auteur or personne autrice for author person? The term chef in French also has two possible feminine forms. So should we say famille chef décoratrice for production designer family, or famille chef with FE at the end, décoratrice for the same element. So in the end, we decided to, luckily the French Academy had ruled on these terms, so we could follow their ruling on that. So Rania talked about consistency as being a challenge, and that is very true. And consistency was an issue that we had to tackle both within and across element sets. Elements with the entity agent as the range or the domain generally have 4 narrower elements with similar labels and definitions. For example, Singer agent has the narrower elements Singer collective agent, Singer corporate body, Singer family, and Singer person. So once a pattern was established, translating the narrower elements within the same element set was easy, but we found that a label or definition needed to be, that when a label or definition needed to be revised, we had to be careful when making corrections to ensure that the translation remained consistent. And consistency between sets of elements was also a challenge because elements have inverses that often use similar terms in the labels and definitions. So one of the advantages of having a single template now is that it will certainly help in that regard, because we won't have to navigate across different files to check for consistency. And of course, consistency is a bigger challenge when more than one translator is involved. So some of the issues now that we encountered during translation, one of the issues that we had to tackle was the removal of parentheses in element names. As you remember, in the original toolkit, many element names used entities in parentheses to distinguish them from similar properties with the same labels. So in the original toolkit, parentheses were used to qualify similar labels by element range, but this practice was found inconsistent and confusing in the English version and was discontinued. So in English, it is not difficult to remove the parentheses and produce a satisfactory result without changing the word order, but this does not work so easily in French, where removing the parentheses requires changing the word order and using an adjective. Appropriate adjectives are not always available, and those that are may sound pedantic or inappropriate. Changing the word order also means that the most significant word will no longer be the first, which is not an issue in English. It was therefore decided to retain parentheses in some instances for consistency and to keep a more useful order when the entry is under the specific term and not the entity. One probably never looks at the text more closely than one has to translate it, and RDA translators have proved to be good proofreaders. During the process of translating RDA reference, we encountered and reported several editorial problems, such as typos and inconsistencies between similar definitions. We also made suggestions to revise the English text whenever a clarification was needed to produce an accurate translation. We also reported more significant problems with some of the definitions. For example, the element coordinates of cartographic content was an attribute in the original toolkit and became a relationship element in the beta toolkit with place as range. The original definition in the beta toolkit did not reflect the change by defining the element as a place, but this was fixed during the 3R project. The word issue and its cognates raise problems. Their meanings are difficult to grasp for a Francophone. For example, does issuing cover only publication? Most reference sources consulted seem to suggest so, but its usage in RDA and in terms such as issuing body agent seem to indicate otherwise. What is the distinction between publication, release, and issuance in a scope note, such as the one for name of publisher, which reads publication includes release and issuance? The distinction seems subtle enough to confuse Google Translate, which suggested back in July 2019 a translation that meant publication includes publication and publication. The element issuing body agent and its narrower elements pose their own difficulties. Issuing body used to refer only to a corporate body under AACR 2. So the question was how to translate issuing body when the term applies to all types of agents. Could body be omitted to avoid confusion and facilitate translation? In the end, the RSC decided to remove body from the labels, and we sighed with a big sigh of relief. So if you, this covers just the part of the translation project that applies to the RDA reference. So if you want to learn more about the original French translation project in its generality, you can refer to the article that Clément Arsenault, Pat Riva, and I wrote for Cataloging and Classification Quarterly in 2014. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. Now we'll turn to Marja-Liisa Seppälä, who has gotten further with the translation of post-3R toolkit than anyone else. So she'll have lots of good information for what the process is starting to take shape as. Marja-Liisa?
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Let's see if I'm able to Yes, sorry. Yes, Finland is the first country going through the full translation process of the new toolkit. And that means lots of testing and also some technical surprises. We are not yet at the same updating pace as the English version. We have already in June translated these updates for July release, but we haven't been able to publish the up-to-date version yet. But when the process is fixed, updating will be very quick and efficient with the help of perfect match, so-called perfect match technique. I think it takes only a couple of days to do all the translations for updates of an release. The tools, we have Trados Studio, Trados Group Share, as Jamie already mentioned. Trados Studio is very professional software, but unfortunately it's a bit slow. And that's why I have now preferred to use the editor of Trados Group Share online platform or something like that, which is very handy. Group Share is a bit confusing. I'm not very good at searching project and everything there, so but it's handy. The new CMS is still a bit new to us because we have only started to create policy statement and examples there. Her Finnish translation team has not yet learned how to update the translation memory or how to import, export files between the Trados Group Share and CMS, or how to get new versions of the toolkit text or RDA references. So we are very heavily dependent on Jamie's support and schedule. And that could be a problem to Jamie and to our team too. I'm a manager of a Finnish 3R project, and I feel that it's challenging to make schedule because there has been so many postpones, and also because of this length of the project, it's a bit difficult to control the human resources of the translation team. It has varied during the process, and of course I need more input from the members of the translation team near the release and less between the releases, and so it's a bit difficult to control these resources. National Library of Finland cooperates closely with the 5 national expert groups, and that needs a lot of coordination. The national expert groups create most of the policy statements and examples, so they have a very essential role in this process. I have learned to keep very low profile what comes to informing the customers about this project. I have learned make no promises before I can see what is the outcome of the release. The National Library of Finland has committed to the Finnish RDA, the translation of RDA in 2011, and the Finnish libraries in the Union Catalogue Melinda, that is most of the Finnish libraries, have committed to the Finnish RDA in 2016, and we have not seen any reason to change the translation policy or question it. And I think Finnish libraries are happy that we have RDA in Finnish in the future too. In order to maintain the language spoken only by 5.5 million people, all kinds of text needs to be translated into Finnish. Many terms like domain and range are translated into Finnish for the first time ever. Of course, these terms have been used in English by system developers and other people, but never translated into Finnish. I feel that in a long run, this Finnish vocabulary will help communication between metadata librarians and system developers. Translation also activates metadata librarians to take in to understand more deeply the content of cataloging rules and perhaps propose changes and improvements to them too. The Finnish translation team consists of 4 people. Each of us are working with RDA only part-time. The original RDA was translated 4 times in 4 years time before publishing. We have translated the new RDA. It has been going on 3 years so far, and we will continue proofreading process after publishing the official Finnish RDA at the end of this year. And I feel that we still need so much support and input from Jamie that in the future it would be more efficient or more sensible. Sorry, I don't know the word, but we need more automation and other arrangement instead of manual work, for example, updating of conref links and control the versions of the files. Then a few words about the challenges connecting to the language. Finnish is a language that has a word order that differs a lot from English. In the traders, the text is divided into segments and word-by-word translation is required more than earlier when we translated the original RDA. So because of we have to change the word order many times, we have been forced to move words from a segment to another or join 2 segments together. But there is a problem when a segment includes a link. It cannot be moved, and that's why there are some sentences that are funny in Finnish because of the word order. And the contents of a Finnish segment differs often from the English one. Boilerplate is of course an improvement, but in Finnish, the context of a phrase or sentences changes the word order or the case version of a word because of the congruence. And that's why in Finnish there are multiple translations for one English phrase or sentence. Translation memory and term base could work nicely, but of course in Finnish we have, for example, a noun that has 15 different cases, 15 different versions, depending on the context of a phrase or sentence. And so there are multiple translation for one English word. The translation memory gets overloaded and term base is not as useful as it should be. Finally, I have a few 2 slides only, a few words about RDA training. Before training, we of course have to publish the policy statements and examples in the toolkit. We need to update workflows and other cataloging instructions in Mark 21. They are done by the national expert groups. And we need also up-to-date RDA registry as well as our national metadata registry. We are starting planning and preparing the training sessions in spring next year. We will create new RDA web pages that will include the key terminology of new RDA. We will prepare short 15 minutes online presentations on challenging concepts like representative expressions and manifestation statements, etc. We are planning to have hybrid sessions in autumn next year, and participants are expected to study the terminology and to watch all the online presentations before attending the hybrid sessions. And perhaps we will have very general topics, how to navigate in a new toolkit, etc. And then more specific, challenging topics about aggregates, diachronics, normans, etc. Let's see. We haven't really have time to plan this all. In addition to National Library, the national expert groups will be active in planning and as presenters. And I'm looking forward to hearing of plans and experience of about training from the other RDA countries. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Marja-Liisa. So as I said before, people can in chat or the QA put in their questions and we'll try to address them. I want to follow up on just a few things that have been said, particularly by Marja-Liisa. Just so everyone understands some of the terms she used, boilerplate. So we use boilerplate, which is an English publishing expression for standard phrasing or text that gets reused again and again. So there is a large part of the translation process is there is a large file that you would put into Trados called boilerplate. And it contains a high number of phrases and sentences that get repeated throughout the RDA text. And then those get what, to use a phrase, another term that Marja-Liisa used, conreft or context reference. So context reference is a kind of link within our CMS that basically takes that text from one file and puts it in another file. So it takes that boilerplate file and it puts it in another file. And so if you change that boilerplate, if you need to change that sentence and even the translation of that sentence, you change it in the boilerplate, and then everywhere it's conreft throughout the other files, it gets changed as well. It's an important kind of working concept in the RDA translation to try and minimize some of the work that goes on. It's an efficiency too that you should understand. With RDA translations, you're translating over 3,000 files, but between translating the boilerplate file and what gets pulled into the RDA toolkit files from the registry translation that you've already done, the reference translation that you've done, that pretty much completes the translation for over 2,000 of those files. So it greatly reduces the number of files that you actually have to actively handle. And then I totally agree with Marja-Liisa that I am too big in the process. People are too reliant on me. And that's part of this process of figuring out this process for the first time. And I hope to soon get out of the way of Marja-Liisa and her team and let them just translate as they need to. So that's one of the things we'll be focusing on in the coming months, is how to minimize my interference. And she raises some really interesting questions because Finnish is a unique language, particularly, I guess, in Europe. Finnish, and we have a Hungarian translation coming, are a different language family group that are structured very differently from your, classic Latin or Germanic languages. And so that segmenting issue is a really interesting one with Trados, and is something maybe that there might be a technical solution for. I can talk to the Trados team, et cetera, and see if there's a way we can expand the defaults for rules for segmenting so that it kind of segments in a different way. But that's, and I raise that just because this is an important part of the translation process, is to get feedback from the translators in ways that we can improve the process. And it might be a technical solution like I just talked about, or as Danielle mentioned, it might be the English language needs to change. The way we've written RDA needs to change to better accommodate the needs of translators. I mean, obviously, we've already gotten to the situation where there's a lot of English terms that are unique in English, but not so unique in other languages. So it's a particular challenge that we'll have to deal with. And Rania may find the segmenting issue is particularly difficult for them when she gets to her team gets to the Trados translating stage. So I'm going to turn to questions we received now. We had one from Stephen Hearn, which is kind of an interesting what if question. What if RDA had been written originally in Arabic or French or Finnish? How would it have been different? Was English necessary for following the IFLA LRM conceptual model? Well, I believe the LRM was written originally in English as well. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong about that. But I don't know if our panel has any reaction to the idea of writing that originally in their native tongue.
Yeah, maybe I can speak first. Because French is quite, at least more similar to English than any of the other languages that we're talking about today, I'm not sure that it would have been that different, except maybe, of course, many of the concepts are related to the language, so like this whole issue about the word issue and its cognates. I mean, obviously, maybe we wouldn't have come up with the same concept exactly if we had to write RDA in French, or some of the elements that were created sometimes, are or the terms that were used in vocabularies were concepts that existed already in English, but maybe if they don't exist in French, then of course maybe we wouldn't have come up with those terms, obviously. But I wonder if because of grammar and maybe in other languages like Finnish and Arabic, that would have been much different.
Well, I haven't met any problems that cannot be solved. Language, this vocabulary and the uniqueness of the words, that is not a problem in Finnish. Surprisingly, we have lots of different words for different things. So the only problem is the word order, and of course we translate meaning, not words, but sometimes the structure can be very complicated. If it includes links, that's a problem. But otherwise, I don't know if it would be better to write the whole RDA in Finnish all over again. I don't think so.
Okay. And Pat Riva in chat pointed out, and it's true, RDA evolved out of AACR2 in some sense, and which had long English language tradition. And so that's part of the reason why it is written in the original English. Obviously, English has an enormous vocabulary, which makes it fairly flexible in usage. But it has been one of the goals of the RSC to kind of address Anglo bias in the toolkit, in the RDA instructions as we move forward and emphasize internationalization and translation. So it's an interesting kind of question. So we have had a few other responses come up, questions. One question is, since the LRM is translated in French in France, does Quebec use the French version, or do we need to adapt the LRM English for Quebec particularity? I guess that's just you, Daniel.
Yeah. Well, yes, I think we are aware that BNF is working on a translation of our LRM, but they haven't made it available. They haven't released it yet, so we couldn't count on that when we started working on the translation. Although some of the basic concepts and terms were already inherited from the previous FR family of models, so those were already translated. There were some concepts that were similar, and but not exactly the same, because for RDA we kind of adapted, or even in English we adopted our own terminology, like for the types of aggregates, collection aggregates, parallel aggregates. Well, those are not found exactly like that in LRM. So even though those were tricky terms to translate, and that would have been useful to consult the French version of LRM, well, I doubt that we would have found an exact solution for that, for those terms. So no, I'll be very curious, of course, to consult and read the French version of LRM, and to see if it might have an impact on the translation that we already did.
Okay, thank you. Preston Salisbury asks, is it any clear, I'm assuming RDA, it means RDA, is RDA any clearer in other languages, or is contributor agent of computer content of equally difficult in every tongue? I'm going to guess that it's equally difficult, but I'll let the others discuss whether it's particularly more difficult in their tongue.
Well, yes, some of the turns of phrases, some of the terms are equally awkward, you know, in the target languages, and but you know, we understand that it's these turns of phrases were used for specific purposes, and luckily in French, okay, it makes for sometimes, of course, longer labels than we would like, but it's not been impossible to find an equivalent. Although in some definitions, sometimes we decided to, when there was maybe too much of repetition, for example, an agent who is a musician, or an agent who is a performer who does something, well, then we decided to express it a little differently, to be a little more concise.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. please.
Sorry, because the word agent actually is very debating word in Arabic. Because the connotation of the word agent for us as Arab is like coordinator, something like this, wakil. So it's like a job, not to describe it in a way it was very difficult, because we used to describe it like in too many words, like it's a person or families or someone, so to just to give the right meaning. But what we achieved to have one word which was more familiar for all of us, which is wakil. So it's not difficult, but maybe not clear, but maybe some words like this needs more clarification, or maybe webinars like this we can gather some of these words to shed light on the difficulties that we faced, and how we solved this problem, so people would be more familiar with the solutions. So this is how we faced it in Arabic.
In Finnish, yes, sorry. In Finnish, this kind of phrases needs. We need to add the entity to which it refers, because we don't have this kind of separate prepositions, but they are included, sort of. They are part of the word, the actual word that comes after the word of. So it's a bit different in Finnish. These kind of phrases, they are doable, but very odd anyway.
One of the things I wanted to discuss today was, so we have this new area of the toolkit called community resources, where we have moved over much of the material that was in appendices of the original toolkit, and have really kind of deal with encoding schemes that are particular to the English language culture. And we've kind of moved them over there and branded them, or clearly stated that these are artifacts of English language practice, and will not necessarily apply to different languages. So as our panelists translate, or if they choose to translate that community resources area, I'm kind of curious, will they choose to translate the English that's already written there, or they actually have the opportunity to rewrite that area with different content and information that's specific to their language community? And do they kind of foresee doing something like that, or like I said, just translating the English, doing something completely different, or kind of a mix of both approaches? Marja-Liisa, you want to speak to that first?
Yes, I think we choose the mix of both approaches. We translate, and then we, after translating the main part of the documents, we will modify it in the CMS, if it's possible to modify it. I'm not sure, but that's our initial plan to do that. But let's see, those national expert groups are responsible for this kind of documents, most of them. So you have to negotiate with them how they would like to do that. So it's a work in progress.
All right. Rania, do you have a response on
that? Yes, actually, we also do mixing the approaches, because it is not always the right solution to choose one approach, because sometimes when as I was talking about in my presentations, that sometimes when we have a suggestion for a word and we present these words to the our colleagues, for example, in Bibliotheca Alexandrina, we find this negative response. This makes us to try to figure out how to solve it. So yes, so we need to change, either to paraphrase or to do other things, or not all the time we find solutions. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Danielle, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, in Quebec, we established a year ago a name authority program that is similar to NACO and is based on NACO practices. So we'll be curious to see what the Anglo-American community will develop in that part of the toolkit, because historically we've always used and applied ACR. Well, we've applied ACR2 and before that ACR1, so we're used to be really applied Anglo-American practices. So with the establishment of this program, it's going to remain so with access points, and then I mean we'll probably want to translate any NACO documentation as faithfully as possible.
Okay, great, thank you. So we kind of have gone over time a little bit here, so I'm going to wrap up. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I particularly want to thank our panelists for their excellent presentations. This event has been recorded, and we will post it, make it the slides and the recording available to all through our YouTube channel and on our rdatoolkit.org. I also want to say that we're continuing to offer these free webinars. I think they've been really interesting and informative. Next month, I believe we have a webinar on application profiles lined up. So I hope you all will join us for that as well. Again, thank you everyone for participating. It's been an excellent little event here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye, everyone.
Au revoir.
Bye.